Okay, so welcome to tonight's Experience ACAP session. The title of this is Move Hearts and Minds with Leadership Coaching. Before we start, in the spirit of reconciliation, ACAP would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and the connection to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to the elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today. So this is me, Dr Pannell, and if you want to grab my email address, if you've got any questions at the end, really happy to answer those as we go along. So I'm the course leader for the Graduate Certificate of Applied Coaching. I will talk a little bit about the course at the end, and we also have our course advisors in the chat box if you've got any questions for them directly as I'm going along. But I wanted to make sure that this session was actually useful. Probably most of us are in some form of lockdown around the country, maybe some of you not even in Australia, and we're all going through quite a lot. And I imagine most of you are in some kind of role that involves some kind of leadership of other people. And so in those leadership type of roles, what I'm going to cover today is how you can use coaching in those leadership situations. So I really want to give you some resources that can be helpful, and then we'll talk a little bit about the course at the end. So just a little bit about me. My background in coaching is I've got a background in psychology and also business. And so the way I sort of think about it is this is about bringing psychology into the workplace. And what I mean by that is bringing evidence-based behavioral change into the workplace. So it's not psychology as in therapy, it's psychology as in motivation and behavioral change. And I really see the value of coaching is about, actually, for me, it gets very sort of almost philosophical. It's about helping other people to grow and become more self-aware, more emotionally intelligent, more able to manage complex decisions and think about all the implications of those. And ideally for me, it's actually about helping other people to have those skills and mindsets so that actually we can have a ripple effect to making the world a better place. So there's a kind of an activist element to what inspires me around coaching, and that sort of altruistic element as well. And in moving my work, in moving from a sort of more therapeutic background many years ago into coaching, it was all about what's the future look like? What is the kind of future that we're wanting to create for ourselves? And I do really love the fact that coaching has that sort of forward focus. So, I mean, I could give you more details about, you know, the letters after my name and that kind of thing, but if you're interested, you can check me out on LinkedIn. There's a lot of information there. I won't go into that because I think one of the things that's really important, if you are going to join a program like this that is taught online, is actually about us building relationships. Ultimately, you know, we all get Zoom fatigue, and I just wanted to sort of stop and bring in a little bit of the personal. So it's not just a little bit about me. I want to pause and actually know a little bit about you. So we've got a bit over 60 people on here. I would love to hear in the chat just really quickly your preferred name and just, you know, 1 or 2 lines about your own interest in coaching, and I'll read some of those out just for us to capture a little bit about who else is on the call, and as much as we can in this short amount of time to start to build a bit of a community. So I just saw some messages. Looks like some of you couldn't hear me. Can you hear me now? I've just changed one of my settings on my computer. I'm not sure if have you missed anything? Great. I'm not sure if you've missed what I've just said. Can you just confirm that if you've missed the last couple of minutes in the chat? Some people heard and some people didn't. Okay, not sure what happened there. So sorry about that, good old glitches, but good that you can all hear me now. All right, someone said that you could hear me right from the beginning, so I won't repeat anything. Basically, I've just said a little bit about me, if any of you couldn't hear that, and I really want to hear just a little bit about you. Okay, so great, we've got a few people diving in. Gavin, working in a school and wanting to use coaching skills for staff development. Fantastic. Noelle, classroom teacher, looking at using psychology and coaching to support young people. That's fantastic. Linda is a new leader wanting to bring about a positive change in the workplace. Anthea, coaching similar to counselling, but what you feel like is more a positive, proactive, activist, future-focused approach. Fantastic. It looks like I might have missed a few others as well. Amanta, I think I'm pronouncing your name. So you're a new people leader and wanting any tips and help you can get. And Sarah, about refreshing skills after moving interstate, having to resign from a job which you love. Wow, that sounds pretty intense. Claire has said you're interested in pursuing coaching after a long career in nursing education and Masters of Nurturing, which covered a fair bit of leadership. And looks like there's quite a few others. So Brony, youth worker course, defence instructor about empowering children. Yes, so coaching skills and empowering kids, I think, is a really good one. And I often say in the class when I'm teaching different parts of this course that I actually think learning coaching can make you help you to make a better parent, or, you know, fine tune some of those parenting skills. Linla, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. You're an underwriter in the finance industry, understanding individuality, behavioural strengths, behavioural elements, and so on. Encourage on development and growth within the industry. Great. Tanya, currently work with guardianship of young people and counselling and want to be able to assist people to get the most out of their lives. Fantastic. It's really lovely to imagine the ripple effect that a lot of you are having, people working in community care, leadership roles, with stress and burnout in therapy, teachers' aid, fantastic, psychology, Shan, looking at youth coaching, working with alcohol and other drugs, and here to understand the connections and difference between counselling and coaching. Great. Aged care chaplain, disaster recovery chaplain. Really great to see you, Melhem. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Working with international students. Alex, after 20 years in sales, like to use my skills to coach others. Yes. And I spoke to someone just recently who was looking at doing this course to fine tune their skills to coach salespeople to be better salespeople. So I'm not sure if that's something you're interested in. Yen, becoming a facilitator in community development sector. Wow, there's quite a lot. I don't know if I'm going to be able to read all these out, but really, really lovely to see. Danielle, health student, looking at improving leadership skills. Okay. And apologies to those of you who I wasn't able to read out what you've said. So just confirming, you can all see my screen and you can all hear me, I'm presuming. So if there's any glitches, please let me know in the chat. Okay. Now, just before we move on, I mean, I'm really aware that we don't have a lot of time for this kind of introduction, but I just wanted to flag that if you do choose to do this course, it is a course that's taught online, but basically it's a cameras on, microphones on kind of session. So it's not a lecture, it's not a one-way street. There's a lot of interaction. You get the opportunity using breakout rooms and things to actually be coaching other people and receive coaching from other people. And there's lots of discussions and so on. As much as we can, we try and make this like a equivalent to a face-to-face classroom discussion. So yeah, in terms of this working as a counsellor and coach, I am going to have I've got a slide where I'll just quickly talk about the difference in some of those things. And I do think it can be a really great skill. I've got a counselling background. It can be a really great skill. Sometimes people need counselling or psychotherapy or even psychology or psychiatry. Sometimes they need coaching and other types of development. So really great to see. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is just a bit of a definition of coaching. I won't spend too much time on that because I want to talk about this idea of a coaching mindset. And ultimately, I think that's what you learn from doing a course like this. You can learn skills and techniques, but it's more when you're having a coaching conversation, you as a coach will have a particular mindset that's a little bit different to if you're giving advice to a friend or you're performance managing someone at work or you're trying to get your teenager to to, stack the dishwasher or whatever it might be. The coaching mindset has a different quality to it. So I'm going to talk about what that looks like, and hopefully you'll get a few takeaways from that. I'm going to talk about how you might have coaching conversations. And I've literally got some questions that you can take away, and happy to share these slides. I'll send them through to the team and they can forward them on to all of you who have registered, so you can take either screenshots or get a copy of these slides once we're done. So how you might have coaching conversations, what could you actually say in the moment? We're going to talk a little bit about coaching for leaders. And although my examples are about coaching in the workplace, I do think leadership is a sort of role that applies to anyone, in a sports environment, in a family setting, in a, community settings, working with people with addiction and so on, like a few of you have mentioned, working as a chaplain and all sorts of environments. I don't think leadership comes from rank. Certainly not age, certainly not gender, any of us. And we've seen, there's lots of young people now that are really stepping up and having quite powerful influences in their own way as leaders in the community. And then, as I said, just a little bit about the graduate certificate in applied coaching and kind of pointing you in the right direction if you're hungry to know more about the course. So I won't keep an eye on the chat at this stage. I'm just going to jump in and out as we go along. Okay, so I wanted to, again, just sort of bring this back to you, like we did right from the start. What's your background? I really want you just to, if you can, if you're driving or multitasking, it might be a little bit difficult. That's fine, but if you can, just take a moment to reflect on a current challenge that you have at work, at home, and this is private. You won't be sharing this with anyone in this call. So it could be something around COVID or work, or your fitness or finances or whatever. So just take a moment just to reflect on the current challenge. And then just moving down to the left-hand side, what's the one thing that you'd like to change about this? You want to develop a bit more muscle, you want to, save a little bit more, you want to, address a particular conversation with someone at work, whatever it might be. Just we want to get a little bit more granular about what it is you're wanting to change here. And then the second question, and we'll come back to this at the end of this session, the second question is, what resources do you currently have to navigate this challenge? And that might seem a little bit abstract, so I just want to break it down a bit. So what resources might be, what thoughts can you have that might help? What friends and family members do you have that might help? What technology do you have even? I've heard of people saying, right, that's it, I'm doing this fitness challenge. I'm getting what is it called? A physical manual alarm, and it's going to be on the other side of my bedroom, so which makes me get out of bed in the morning. Sometimes it gets that practical when we're thinking about changing our behavior. But resources, it might be practical, it might be, software type things, digital, it might be people, it might be financial, but certainly what I'm more interested in is what resources do you have in your own mind? So do you have the ability to, say those of you with a counselling background, to reframe what's going on, or to observe your thoughts, or to journal? What are your own personal resources that you have to navigate this challenge? And then at the end of this call, I'm going to come back to this, and hopefully you might have one or two other resources in your toolkit bag to address this particular challenge. So it's just something to contextualize this as we're going. Before I move on, I'm going to jump in and see if there's anything in the chat box that I've missed. So welcome to Queenie, Nicola, and anyone else that I haven't said hi to. So I'm hoping that you've all had a chance just to think about one thing that you might want to explore. And this is a really good thing about doing a program like this, is that although you're learning to coach other people, ultimately you're also learning to coach yourself. And you'll learn different coaching techniques that you can apply to yourself that might help you to get out of some stuck situations. All right, so what is coaching? Coaching is very much concerned with change. You could say behavioural change, growth, transformation. But certainly as a coach, my role as a coach is not about giving answers, but asking powerful questions. And so the sort of philosophy, I've got another slide about this, but the philosophy of coaching is that I don't presume that I'm the expert and I know something about my coachee's problem and I can give them advice. When I give advice as a coach, I'm basically disempowering them from finding the answers themselves. And this is part of that mindset shift that I mentioned earlier that can really help as a leader. And I'm preempting another slide as well, that as a leader, when the workplace and the community place is so complex, we no longer have all the answers. And so you as a leader don't have to give advice or give answers, but when you learn the coaching skills, you can ask powerful questions that can bring out the knowledge and the insights in the people around you, which brings that kind of richness into the workplace. So I'll unpack that a little bit as we go. Certainly, I want to just really flag this at the beginning, that coaching is an ethical and a theoretically driven profession. Sounds like a bit of a mouthful, but basically, the leadership coaching that is at the cornerstone of this particular course is very much driven by ethical principles and guidelines that you get trained in, and is very much driven by research. So what we would say is evidence-based research, that we only teach in this course what we know works. So we will teach something like solution-focused approach to coaching or cognitive behavioral approach to coaching, because people have gone out there and tested these different techniques, and we know that they actually have a positive impact. So you're not learning things that are kind of more speculative or things that are maybe in the field of pop psychology. You're learning things that where there's been peer-reviewed research and we know that they're effective. The other part of coaching is that a coach develops this sort of partnership, and it's the process of increasing performance, maybe even increasing meaning and quality of life. And a lot of the clients that I'm working with these days is they've actually performed at quite a high level. They might be at a director level, you know, they've been quickly promoted. They've got sometimes more money than they know what to do with because they're just so successful, but they're really struggling with a sense of meaning, with a sense of legacy and giving back, really wanting to help people around them to grow and so on. And so sometimes the coaching is not as much about growth in terms of bigger, more. It's actually about contributing and how can we make a difference in the world? How can we improve the quality of life around us? So I just wanted to flag that at the outset, because sometimes in a marketing perspective, coaching can be perceived as sort of pursuing maybe even financial gain for individuals' own goals. And I do think that might be one part of it for some people, but most people come to coaching with a sort of broader agenda than that. Few other definitions of coaching. So it's a goal-focused conversation centered around this acronym GROW, which I'm going to unpack a little bit later. A few of you might already know about the GROW framework. And if you feel like Googling it, if you haven't heard, then check out GROW and coaching. And there's some great clips on YouTube and things around that. It's a very, very simple framework. And so coaching is really about using questions to help the other person understand their own thinking and their own meaning making. Sometimes I use a metaphor, it's like having a helicopter, and you're having a helicopter and watching your own thinking, watching your own way that you're making meaning of things. And if we've known from psychology many years now, if we can change the way that we're making meaning about something, we can often change our response to it. So, you know, we might see someone being rude to us or ignoring us, and we get really annoyed and we behave poorly back to them. If we think, maybe they're stressed and they haven't had a hug for, 6 months because they're living on their own and they're working from home in COVID, maybe the meaning is actually this person's in a state of distress. I could be more empathic towards them. I'm going to have a different response than actually seeing them as as someone that's a bit of a pain. And we change the meaning, and all of a sudden we've changed the way that we relate to that person. Now, super simple example, but that kind of thing happens all the time in coaching, where we might be looking and seeing something from one perspective. We look at it from another perspective. It's like, oh, I hadn't thought of that, or I hadn't seen that before. Now I might respond in a different way. Sometimes this is about our relationship to workplace decisions and challenges. Sometimes it's certainly in relation to, interpersonal conflicts, but often actually it's in relation to ourselves and our own struggles and our own thoughts and challenges. If we can see what's going on within ourselves in a different way, we often can then respond differently to that. So that's a kind of cornerstone to coaching. I won't be able to go into that into a lot of detail, but I'll touch on that a little bit more in a few other slides. So when we shift our perspective, that in turn has the behavioral shift. So coaching is not about teaching a dog new tricks in terms of just change your behavior, the behavior change, whether it's someone coming out of addiction or, someone performing better or contributing better at work or whatever it might be, it comes from a deeper layer within that person, from a change in their mindset and changing their thinking and changing the way that they're framing things. So you learn how to actually work at that deeper level rather than just trying to force behavioral change. So I'm just going to pause there and check if there's any questions or comments that anyone wanted to make. Feel free, I will pause every now and then, so feel free to jump in if you wanted to say something and I can have a look as we go along. I've got another definition of coaching, and this is a little bit wordy, but it is actually worth us spending 30 seconds on this. Coaching on the left-hand side here by Tony Grant, who's basically the kind of, you could say, the father of coaching psychology. He says that coaching is a collaborative. So it's like this idea of a partnership. It's solution focused. So we're not looking at problems, we're looking at solutions. It's results orientated. It's moving towards what is it you're wanting to change. It's a systematic, as in step-by-step process, in which the coach facilitates the enhancement of goals, the enhancement of performance, the enhancement of learning, and the personal growth of the individual. So sometimes it's growth, sometimes it's learning, sometimes it's goals, and sometimes it's performance. There's quite a lot sort of built into that one statement. Hopefully it gives you a bit of an idea as to what is coaching. And then the International Coaching Federation defines coaching as partnering with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process to inspire them to maximize their personal and professional potential. Looks like I've got a little comment, so I'm just going to catch that. Great. So Jessie's introduced herself, so welcome. And the difference between counselling and coaching, I just saw in that sort of question there, Jessie, we are going to touch on as well. So this is the slide. How is coaching actually different to therapy or mentoring, consulting, training, psychological services? Does anyone want to jump in there in the chat and try and answer that? So the question Alex has asked is, so if you come across that someone has an issue that's holding them back, what do you do to manage that? I've got a lot to say around that, Alex, but it's not a simple answer. So one of the short answer to your question is, say if someone is deliberately self-sabotaging, for example. I had a client just recently, and a huge procrastinator came to me for coaching because he just could not stop procrastinating and was getting him in trouble at work. And so, that was the issue that was holding him back. But what we did to help to manage that is actually to understand, like I touched on earlier, what was driving that behavior. And actually, after talking through and spending a bit of time, what I call swimming around the problem or the idea, building a really good rapport and sense of trust and safety and so on. Another layer came out where he talked about how he just basically is obsessed with pleasing people. He loves being Mr. Nice Guy. And we're able to, after, I think it might have even been a couple of sessions, he was able to make this link between he was procrastinating whenever there was a moment where he felt like he couldn't be Mr. Nice Guy and he had to deliver bad news or disappoint someone, or he felt like what he had to do was too hard and he couldn't do it at the standard he wanted to, so he's going to let someone down. That was what was driving his procrastination. So then we started to do a bit of a deep dive on that pattern around him being kind of an obsessive pleaser. And I've been working with him now for a few months, actually. And as a result, he's worked out that, and he no longer has that pattern. He's just so much happier. And so now he's freed up a whole lot of energy. And now a lot of what we're talking about in the coaching sessions is, what does he want to do with his extra time? So he's working full time in a very senior role, but also doing some really great creative projects. So where I'm coaching him on how he can sort of move forward in some of these creative projects and so on. So sort of a simple example, not clearly answering your question, Alex, but just giving you an indication that if we're seeing a behavioural issue, often there's something deeper. We do a bit more work as to what's deeper. Once that shifts, then we can often look at, okay, how does that show up in the rest of your life? So it does have overlaps with therapy, but good that you were happy with that answer, Alex. Thank you. But in terms of the difference between, say, coaching and therapy is, I would say therapy is much more looking at the past. Coaching has much more of a forward focus, and therapy is often dealing with trauma and things that have much more of a stronger psychological element to them, an emotional element to them. Coaching doesn't tend to deep dive into that as much, and so there is actually almost like a line that we draw as a coach between when do we need to refer someone to therapy, and it's when the level of distress that's coming up in what they're sharing is just quite extreme, and they need more of that emotional support, and maybe even more focus in healing some things from the past. That we would say is beyond the realm of coaching, and that would be when someone is working therapeutically. And as some of you have mentioned, some people do work both. It can be difficult, though, as one person to sometimes have your coaching hat on, sometimes have your therapy hat on with the one person. It can be helpful to separate those two out. So Melham, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Really good point. The coaching doesn't seek to fix. It seeks to journey with a person, tap into hidden and unused strengths within the person. Fantastic. So yeah, the coaching is certainly about being open to feedback, but sometimes there can be in the forward focus, sometimes people can kind of rush into the future and almost like ignore what's going on in the past. So I see your point, Alex, about, it can be difficult. If someone needs therapy, certainly sometimes they can avoid that as well. There was also a question, so Nat had, in terms of NLP training. So to be honest, this particular course, because our focus is on evidence-based approaches, neuro-linguistic programming, it just doesn't have the evidence that we need to make it a robust approach. So often people associate coaching with NLP. That tends to be more life coaching, and life coaching doesn't tend to have as much of a focus on evidence-based practices, whereas this is leadership coaching, where we're really only using approaches where we've got lots and lots of research and all these published academic articles behind it. So we're not saying that you can't use NLP, but it's not something that you would get taught in this particular course because it doesn't have the evidence base to it. All right. Just see if there's anything. I've lost my cursor. Just see if there's anything else there that I haven't, that I've missed. Yeah, so counselling can be solution-focused and strengths-based, absolutely, Jessie. I guess the thing with counselling would still have a process of trying to, the way I say it is trying to make peace with your past, whereas coaching is, okay, you've got to the stage where things are kind of levelled out in terms of working with your past. Okay, now what do you want to build moving forward? Maureen, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly, as a clinical psychologist, there is a large overlap. Lots of the work we do is preventative and coaching forward. Yeah, that's a really good point. And also there's that collaborative approach. Yes, I've just lost my cursor again. There it is. Yeah, so it's a really good point that not all psychotherapy, psychology, psychiatry is past focused. It's, I guess, the other thing that we would say in terms of defining more of a therapeutic approach to a coaching approach is how much level of distress is there. And if there's any kind of diagnosis, say of depression or anxiety, that's would be considered, say, comes up in the DSM-5, so quite prevalent experience of depression, anxiety, and so on, we would call that someone that needs the clinical support of either a counsellor, psychologist, psychiatrist, psychotherapist, and so on. But it's a difficult one because there are certainly overlaps. But the other thing in terms of just coaching is that the coaching, some people will offer coaching and also offer a mentoring. Mentoring is much more of an advice giving. It's almost like an elder, someone that's very experienced. They give advice to, the young up and coming people, say in a particular industry. So coaching doesn't tend to be advice focused, but there is a lot of people that do coaching work, me included, that also do consulting work. And so some of the consulting work I do is about bringing the coaching mindset into organizations. So for example, doing some work with some of the government departments just recently. Hopefully you can all still see me because I just got an error message on my screen. Does everyone still hear me and see me? Yes, great. Thank you, Jude. Okay, so I just did some consulting work with one of the government departments on how they can build resilience amongst their staff during all the challenges with COVID. So I was using the coaching training, but it was more in a consulting kind of capacity. It wasn't one-on-one coaching. And so that's consulting, training, I sort of see often they overlap, and psychological services, hopefully I've already touched on that. So I just want to leave that a little bit grey, but acknowledge that most of the time coaching is not dealing with people that have a diagnosis of some kind of either trauma or a high level of distress. Okay, so I wanted to just now turn our thoughts to, I touched on this at the beginning, this idea of a coaching mindset. So the assumption is that our coachee, the person we're working with, has the answers. We simply help them to change the viewing, to change the doing. That's quote comes from my colleague, Tony Grant. So when we helped, I often use the metaphor of a Rubik's Cube. Imagine someone's looking at all red face on the Rubik's Cube. If they turn and look at all the yellow or the blue or whatever, then we're seeing things from different angles, and it really does have quite a profound effect. Those aha moments that good old Oprah talks about and others, that's when we see things from a different perspective. We might make connections that we hadn't seen before. And as a result of making those connections, I think there's also some neural pathways that can open up in our brain as well. And that's what then changes our behavior. And so our role, the coaching mindset, and if you are in a leadership role and you're wanting to just learn some quick things on the fly about coaching, then the key thing is that you ask questions to help the other person change how they're seeing things. So this is a difference between asking questions or saying things that's fixing the problem, giving advice, getting the person to go away so you can keep working. You ask questions that help the person to see the situation differently. Someone mentioned as well in the chat, so very much this sort of solution focused rather than problem focused mindset. So we might say things like, what have you tried before? What has already worked? What do you think you should do here? If you knew you had the answer, what would you say? Those kinds of things. And then the other part of this mindset, which we go into in quite a lot of detail in the very first class, is this idea of a hypothesis testing rather than, so with clinical work, much more there's a diagnosis, maybe even other work, there's more of a judgment. I think this person's, got this going on. We'll set this up, and I'm not saying that that's what everyone else does, but deliberately in the coaching mindset, we have these hypotheses like, I think this procrastinating is linked to something around conflict with others. So I'll have a hypothesis in my mind, and that will inform the questions that I ask of my coachee, and will inform the kinds of things we'll inquire. I might say, how do you go when there's conflict at work? We might unpack that a bit more. So I'm constantly, in my coaching mindset, asking questions to test my hypothesis about what I think might be underneath this, what the client's doing. And we teach you in the class how to map that. So for those of you with a clinical background, it's kind of like a case conceptualization or a case mapping of what we think is going on for our client. And that sort of mapping will inform the way that we work with someone. So our coaching questions are not just sort of random. They're actually informed by quite a deep level of listening and observing and gathering information. Just check if there's any comments that I've missed in the chat. Okay. So this idea of a coaching mindset, you might want to just sort of think back now to that very first question I asked you about thinking about something in your own life that is private, that you might want to sort of, think about the resources you already have to deal with this. And what might happen if you shift your own mindset about this situation? So say, for example, if someone's got a conflict with a colleague at work and, okay, I need some coaching on this conflict situation. All right, how can I shift the way I see this situation? How can I see it from their point of view? How can I see it from, 5 years down the track point of view? What might I be missing here? What assumptions have I made? Those are the sorts of questions that we can ask that put us into that kind of inquiring or curious or coaching mindset. So coaching conversations, it's informed by that coaching mindset, is really about asking powerful questions. And I've got a few examples in the next couple of slides. As I've mentioned, really focusing on asking, not telling. We try not to lead the witness, so to speak. So we try not to give advice through our questioning. So rather than saying, have you talked to them? Which is really saying, I think you should talk to them. We might say, well, what have you tried here? What's worked and what hasn't worked? What have you addressed and what have you not addressed? So we're a little bit more general. So we're trying not to give advice through our questions. And as I've tried to sort of emphasize, we're really listening beyond what is being said. What's underneath. There's a great article, those of you who are interested, in the Harvard Business Review about really listening. They talk about level 4 listening, and it's listening to the meaning behind what's being said rather than just the surface level words of what's being said. And to use that as a leader actually becomes a really powerful tool, because you pick up things that you might not have noticed before, and you end up having much deeper conversations with people. Okay, so let's get a bit practical. Questions to support this dialogue, to support these coaching conversations. So you could use these in any situation. And of course, you could use them in a counselling or psychology setting anytime. But I just wanted to give you some practical questions. So, someone says, I'm really struggling with getting out of bed before 10 a.m. in the morning. Well, what does that mean for you? And they might say, well, I'm just lazy. Well, what else might be going on for you? It might be you're actually exhausted, or there's some clinical depression there or something. So looking at the meaning that someone's attributing to something, there's a whole lot you can deep dive around that particular question. Certainly you could say, well, what do you think or feel about this? So just spending, often as a normal conversation, we rush to fix or solve or close things off. So if we stay with whatever someone's sharing and just tell me a bit more about that. How are you feeling about that? What are your thoughts around that? What's going on in your mind about that? What are you worried about here? The next question, what's your take on this? What is your thoughts around this? We're just trying to slow down. As I said earlier, this idea of swimming around the particular issue at hand for much, much longer than we might be used to. Often that's where the real insights come up. What's the best thing about that is another question. What's working here? That's more of a solution focused question. What do you love about this? What even do you miss about this? Because it's telling you about what the person loves. The opposite question, what's the toughest thing about this? What are you really struggling with here? What do you really need some support in here? What's the challenge here? What else comes to mind? Simply, that's a really, really simple question, just to get someone to try and look at the Rubik's Cube from another angle. Is there anything else you might want to add, explore, consider, think about, talk about, share? You can change these questions as you go. But they are pretty straightforward questions. I'm not suggesting these aren't the questions that I would use every day in a coaching setting. It's more like a sort of dipping our toe into the water. But I wanted you to get the sense of the mindset that's behind these questions. Is basically this curious mindset that's very much focused on, tell me more. Let's unpack this. Let's stay here. Let's listen more. Let's inquire more. So I'm hoping that can help. And if you haven't already, thinking about that particular challenge that you brought to the very beginning of this call, and just seeing if there's any of those questions you can apply to yourself. So I'm just going to pause there and see if there's anything in. Alex had a good one to add to that. What gets in the way? If anyone wants to throw in any other questions to share with the rest of the group, that would be fabulous to see as well. So one thing that we don't tend to ask in coaching is why. We don't tend to say, why do you think that? Because that tends to get us back into abstraction. Sometimes it can get people a bit more defensive. So these questions, you can see all of them almost start with what. It might be when. When do you notice that you're doing this particular thing? What's the link between you eating, a packet of biscuits and whatever? It's like, oh, it's every time you get home from working for a 12-hour shift. Okay, so what do you think might be going on there? Let's explore that a little bit more. So most of the time we don't ask why, we're asking more the what, when, and where type questions. All right, I've got a few more questions, I'm pretty sure, on my next slide. So these come from a particular chapter in this book by David Clutterbuck, who's another kind of famous famous coach and coach trainer. And so some of what he asks is, I'm curious about, and just I'm curious about, like, what, when you shared about your boss, you rolled your eyes. I'm just curious about what was going on for you when you rolled your eyes. So some of you with a counseling or therapeutic background, you can hear there's a definite overlap here. But I guess the main thing is that what we're looking at is just at this stage, we're trying to unpack and explore what's going on. I'm noticing, I'm feeling, or I'm wondering. So as a coach, I'll share a little bit about my experience. I might then say, what are you noticing here? As we've been spending 20 minutes, I might not say that directly, but if we've been spending a few minutes here exploring this, conflict that you got, what are you noticing that there's the theme here? And it might be something like, it's always everyone else's fault, or it's always your fault. You're the one that's in the wrong here. And we just start to unpack that. You could ask something like, tell me more about this from the perspective of the other person and, the past and future. What if the opposite is true? So this is a really key thing that I find comes up a lot. It almost is the way that our psychology works, is we often jump from one extreme to another. So someone thinks that, they're absolutely no good, and everyone else is perfect. And it's kind of this like all or nothing thinking. So one of the things we look at is helps people to shift their thinking from not so extreme black and white. What's it like to sort of see things more in the middle? There's a whole lot of layers around that in terms of the research we've done around the way the adult mind develops. And there's an adult development discipline, where people have done research as to how our thinking shifts from this sort of extreme binary to be able to cope with much more nuance, paradox, things that are true and untrue at the same time, and so on. So there's a whole lot of questions that we can bring in to help someone be more comfortable with paradox and so on. But I just wanted to give you a few basic examples right at the start here. So I think that's a question that you've got here, or is it, and you're asking in terms of, we might help the person to look at the difference between their mental, or you could say their cognitive, emotional, or wealth blocks. One of the ways, in terms of this idea of the resources that each of us have to deal with challenges, sometimes the resources might be really practical. So as I mentioned, it might be, things we do, it might be people that are there to support us. But a lot of the time with the coaching psychology focus that we have in this course, it's looking at what is our thoughts and how is our thoughts linked to our feelings and our behavior, which is kind of the core of psychology in general. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question there, Nat. If you wanted to throw it back to me, I'm happy to kind of come back to it again. So now we've looked a little bit about this idea of a coaching mindset. So it's curious, it's slowing down, it's exploratory. We've talked about a few of the kind of questions that you could bring in. Now I just want to spend a few minutes as we move towards the end of our session looking at coaching for leaders, remembering that it can be in any situation. So increasingly, is hopefully happening more and more, leaders are moving away from this command and control, I'm the boss, do as I say kind of thing, and advice giving, to a leader as coach approach. And there's been, actually, I was involved in doing some research, and the organizations that use much more of where the leaders coach their staff rather than give advice or rather than boss them around, are far more productive. There's far more better morale. There's much less attrition. There's a whole lot more focus on customer satisfaction. It's quite astounding, actually, the link between leaders coaching their staff and staff wellbeing and organizational performance. And that's why I think there's going to continue to be quite a lot of growth in the coaching industry, because we can see the positive effects it has in the workplace, and you could even say in the bottom line. And also, as I think I've mentioned in my next slide, is no, I've got it elsewhere, is that leaders can't have all the answers, as I mentioned earlier. So we can't just expect that the leader always gives advice and fixes problems. It's about working together much more collaboratively. So the leader as a coach is influencing others through questioning. This is the key shift. It's not about telling, bossing around, directing, making calls on things. It's about asking first. So really focused on this building rapport, show that you get the other person's point of view through all of the questions that we started to table on the previous couple of slides, asking questions for clarification. So I might say, I've made an assumption here. Is this correct? or it sounds like you're saying such and such. Is, am I on the right track here? Spending a lot more time kind of linking together, going, hey, are we on the same page? Thinking through the problem together in this dialogue kind of way, rather than someone be the expert and someone else be the junior person. And what we find also, and the research is coming up more and more, and we still need to do more research on this, but more and more we're finding that if someone is coached in a workplace setting and they learn to find the answers for themselves, it's like that analogy of giving someone a fish, feed them for a day, and teaching them to fish feed them they feed themselves for a lifetime. Similar thing in the workplace. If I say to someone, let's explore this and unpack this together, and I want to help you to solve this problem, they then learn, the employee learns that way of thinking about problems themselves. They don't go, oh, I've got a problem, I need to go and call my boss. They go, okay, how can I think about this differently? What have I not seen here? Who do I need to talk to? What am I missing? What assumptions have I made? And so on. So they learn to actually coach themselves, and it upskills the employee at a much higher level when they're working in an environment where the leader's working as a coach. So I just wanted to pause there and see if anyone had any comments that they wanted to say about that. Now, one thing I wanted to sort of flag here is that this is easier to do when we're not under pressure. When we're all under a lot of pressure with COVID and working from home and all sorts of things, and kids and puppy dogs in the background, all sorts of challenges, it is, of course, a lot harder to slow down and focus on the other person and get lots of questions and explore. So I wanted to just flag that. But I don't think it's impossible. And the ideal, if I was to be idealistic, is that if we can bring more and more of that mindset, even in stressful situations, then we can actually elevate our approach to stressful situations. So we're much more responsive and much less reactive. But I just wanted to flag that it can take a while to practice this. And sometimes it's easy to practice this in less high pressure situations. And Noelle, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, is, yes, definitely an empowering for all in a workplace or a classroom. And as we've all seen, kids have the most amazing wisdom. Like, it's incredible what they already get. So if we can really create that environment to support that and bring that wisdom out, I think that actually all of us adults can learn a whole lot from, other children, other cultures, Indigenous people, all sorts of people that have different ways of seeing the world. And the more that we can tap into that wisdom, I think the better the world's going to be. But that's just me and my idealism for now. But in terms of the leader as coach, I really encourage you, if you can, have these micro moments through the day where you're influencing through questioning rather than getting things done through giving direction. I'm not suggesting you do this all the time for every transaction. Sometimes you just got to get a quick response out, but there are those moments. It's about, I'll touch on this hopefully in the next couple of slides, recognizing when you have a coaching moment. Yes, we can learn so much from children, absolutely. Okay, so as I said, pretty much this slide, leaders no longer have all the answers, and it's about facilitating these ad hoc coaching conversations. And I'm going to take you through this little framework again from my colleague, Tony Grant. He calls it RAH. Recognize, ask, reframe, and agree. It's just on the next page. So the RAH little technique is we recognize in the middle of a classroom or, a family situation, here's a coaching moment. I don't have to give a quick response here. I can slow it down and ask questions, recognizing that there's an opportunity to see this from a different perspective. And then I'm focused on asking questions. Tell me more about that. How are you seeing this? What might you be missing here? You might even say you're open to hearing my point of view. So really focusing on that curious mindset, reframing the situation. Okay, now that we've explored it, how might you address it? What else could you do here? What are your options here? This is where you bring in the GROW framework that you could learn. It's a pretty straightforward framework. And then the agree, this is the key that turns it into a coaching conversation, because agree is, okay, what are you going to do now? What are you committed to changing? What are you committed to doing differently in your behavior? And we might even building there some goals and some SMART goals about, how can you make sure that you're measuring them, that you're accountable, and so on. So really simple framework, but just acknowledging or recognizing when's a coaching moment, moving into asking mode and exploring, reframing the situation, coming to some kind of conclusion as to what it is that the person's going to be committing to. And you might even circle back around and excuse that background noise. You might even circle back around to coming back and having that conversation again with someone. Okay, you agreed that you're going to, do this report by 5 p.m. on Friday. Okay, it's 9 o'clock Monday morning. Let's come back to that. All right. So I'm just going to see if anyone had the reference for RARA. It's Anthony Grant. I'm not sure which paper it is actually. I need to double check for you, Mohammed. But happy to follow that up. I haven't looked at the reference for a while. Happy to follow that up and get someone to send that through to you. So Miles, I think you're on the call. Could you take a note for me to follow up with Mohammed on that question? So the RARA technique. So just a couple other things I've mentioned about the structuring sessions with this GROW framework. So this GROW is an acronym for the words goal, reality, options, and way forward. And basically, if you're having a coaching conversation on the fly with someone, at the end of the day, the difference between a coaching conversation and a chat is it has a focus. So in this conversation, we're trying to solve a particular problem. So that's the goal piece. The reality is, well, what's going on for you right now? What do you think's the issue here? How do you think the other person sees it? What might you not have noticed here? What are the real challenges? Can you tell me more about that? So this idea of swimming around in the problem. Once we've looked at the reality, sometimes the goal will change. It's like, oh, it's not procrastination, it's pleasing people. And then we might swim around the reality for a bit more. Eventually we look at, okay, what are your options to change this behavior, or what are you going to consider? And then the way forward is similar to the, going back to the RARA, it's the agree part of the RARA technique. It's, okay, what are you committed to making some changes about in your behavior? So again, just to make this really practical, here's some actual questions that you can ask that puts you in grow mode. You could do this in an hour's session with someone, or you could do it in 10 minutes. You could do it driving your kid to exercise, because that's the only place we can go in Sydney at the moment, and have this sort of conversation. So what is it that you're wanting to focus on? What would you like to achieve? They're the kinds of questions that we ask when we've got our goal hat on. The reality. What's happening at the moment? What have you already done? What's in the way? We've touched on some of those already. Options. What options do you have? What else could you do? What are the pros and cons of these? So you're helping someone to make a decision. And then once they've made a decision, what option will you choose? What action might you take? What are you committed to doing here? So again, as I mentioned, you certainly take a screenshot if you want, but I'm happy to share these slides. This did come from somewhere on the web, I'm not sure where, but there's quite a lot on the web around using GROW in coaching if you're wanting to dig a bit deeper on that. Okay, and then SMART goals. Most of you will know about this, that when we're coaching, we are putting forward goals that are specific. So this is the acronym for SMART: measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. I won't go into that in detail because there's a lot on the web on that. But it's making sure that we don't stay abstract as a coach. It's like, okay, what are you committed to? And so every single coaching session with my clients, they'll have one or two things. We call it homework. Sometimes I joke around and call it home play, that they'll be exploring or committing to or testing out. And then in the next session, we come back and go, how did you go with those particular things that you're trying out? And I don't want to spend any time on this, but I just wanted to, maybe it's a little too advanced, but I just wanted to show you this as one of the things that we're teaching the students at the moment in the foundations classes. There's different, this is again, one of Tony Grant's ideas. There's different types of goals. We might have goals that are more about learning something, some goals that are more about doing something, some goals that are a long time in the distant future, some goals that are like tomorrow. We might have some goals where we're moving away from, we're not going to do this anymore, other goals that we're moving towards. And so you'll learn a little bit more in the course as to how, as a coach, oh, with this particular issue, I need to actually focus on more of a higher order or a values-based conversation. That's the very top one there, the higher order goals. rather than being more lower order and specific, okay, getting granular. And so I wanted you to be aware that the goals have quite a lot of depth to them when we're working with someone, and that one person might say, my goal is to, do, what is it, couch to 5K. Someone else's goal might be to find a sense of meaning in life. Or someone says, I want to be a better dad, for example, and they've got a conflicting goal because they also want to get the next promotion. So sometimes we're looking at the conflict between different goals in this, what I call the goal wheel. So I'm not expecting you to get the detail of this. I just wanted you to be aware that when I say goals, we're actually talking about quite a lot of layers as to what we'd call goal theory, and you will learn a little bit more about that in the course. Any comments on that before I jump into the next thing? Yeah, I'm hoping to not overwhelm you too much, but I wanted to give you a little bit to sort of think about. So I think this is my last slide in terms of our theory, and then I was going to give you a couple of slides about the course. So come back to what we talked about at the very beginning, which again, remember, was private. Reconsider the challenge you listed at the beginning of this session. And just going down through the right-hand side, what resources do you now have to navigate this challenge? So anything you can use from the RARA technique, from the GROW, even from that previous slide just there about the different types of goals, the idea of looking at things from the Rubik's Cube, how could you look at it more differently? Might even be a resource to get someone to coach you on this so that you can sort of talk through and have someone really listen deeply and help you explore a bit more deeply what's going on for you. So now just moving to the bottom, what's the one thing you're now committed to doing to address this particular challenge? It might be, okay, I'm going to Google and find myself a coach, or I'm going to go and find out about the GROW framework and apply it to this situation. So I really encourage you, if you feel to just commit to one simple thing as a result of this call that you're going to take away in relation to the challenge you listed at the beginning of the session. And then the last question, so this is a little mini sort of self-coaching moment. How will you hold yourself accountable? You might, tell a friend or a loved one, okay, I've just had this session. I'm now committing to do X, Y, Z. Can you remind me tomorrow and check in with me that I've done it? It might be as simple as that. You might put, I do this all the time, I'm a bit obsessive, calendar reminders that pop up that say, do this, or make sure you've done X, Y, Z, or, call your mum, whatever it might be, that pops up as a reminder. So all sorts of different ways to hold yourself accountable. So really encourage you to make sure that you've been able to translate some of this into your own life. And you might even want to think about how you can translate some of this into people around you in terms of a little bit of a mini coaching. So yes, thank you for the thanks to those of you who had to have to duck off. That's totally fine. This is recorded if you need to leave, and you can see the last little bits later. That's fine. Really happy to help out that ripple effect of positive change in the world. And yes, the slides will be shared to all of you. We'll send them via as a PDF. Okay, just a few little points for those of you interested in the graduate certificate in applied coaching. So it's an ICF credentialed course. So it's International Coaching Federation, very much focused on applied knowledge. Hopefully you've seen that a little bit in what we've been doing tonight, giving you some theory, but always coming back to what does this mean in your own life. So it's about leadership coaching, much more than, say, life coaching. As I've said, hopefully I've been focusing on this evidence-based, using psychology in the workplace. You're learning how to develop that coaching mindset, understanding how to inspire people to change and lead themselves. And why would you study coaching? Because we've got proven techniques to support growth, change, even transformation that can be applied anywhere. And it's a really great skill. As I said, you can coach yourself and coach your kids and your family members and so on. Last point, I think, is this course is very much focused on professionals, those who are interested in leadership coaching, that you might use coaching as part of your current practice. And sometimes we get people that are already working as a coach that want an ICF certification and in-depth knowledge and practice. My last couple of points is the course is taught by experienced executive and leadership coaches. As we said, we use lots of evidence-based theories, lots of applied focus. And our current cohort, we're up to, I think now 3 or 4 trimesters that we've been running this course. We've had extremely positive feedback from people. So I think that was all. For anything more, that's our website. There's the email, there's our phone number, and you've also got hopefully Miles and I can't remember whoever else was here, our course advisors that you can touch base with. So really, thank you for the thanks. And if anyone's got any other questions, happy to stay on and yeah, happy to stay on and answer any questions. I might have missed some in terms of scrolling up. So if I've missed your question, feel free to throw it back into that chat. But at this stage, I think that's all from me, and I really appreciate your time. So wishing you all well. And yeah, thanks everyone. I'll stay on and just see if there's any last questions, but I'll stop the recording now. Thank you.